By 1944, the German Panzerwaffe had succumbed to a specific kind of madness, gigantism. They believed that the solution to every tactical problem was more steel. They built the Tiger I, weighing 56 tons. They built the Panther, weighing 45 tons. They built the King Tiger, weighing nearly 70 tons. These machines were mobile fortresses. Their frontal armor was so thick that most Allied shells simply bounced off. To the German tankers, armor was life. They felt secure inside their steel boxes. They believed that a tank's primary job was to sit on a hill, absorb punishment, and use its superior gun to destroy the enemy from long range. They viewed agility as secondary. Who needs to move fast when you are invulnerable? When they looked at the American armored forces, they were unimpressed. They saw the M for Sherman, which they called the Ronson, because it supposedly lit up first time, every time. They saw it as a medium tank that was good enough but not excellent. But what they really mocked were the American tank destroyers. Specifically, the light ones. German doctrine stated that a tank hunter, Jagdpanzer, should be heavily armored and low profile, like the Hetzer or the Jagdpanther. They couldn't understand the American philosophy. The Americans were fielding vehicles that looked like tanks but had armor so thin that a heavy machine gun could punch through it. German officers joked that the Americans had run out of steel. They saw these light vehicles as suicide traps. Why would anyone get into a vehicle that cannot stop a rifle bullet, they asked. They believed that the Americans were sacrificing their crews for the sake of mass production. This arrogance blinded them to a simple physical reality. Force equals mass times acceleration. The Germans had focused entirely on mass. They had forgotten about acceleration. They didn't realize that the Americans had built a machine that wasn't designed to take a punch. It was designed to be so fast that the punch never landed. The cult of the heavy tank was about to meet the cult of the hot rod. The M18 Hellcat was not a tank. It was a tank destroyer. And it was born from a radical doctrine championed by General Andrew Bruce. Bruce believed that you shouldn't fight enemy tanks with your own tanks. You should fight them with specialized tank killers. He wanted a vehicle that was faster than anything on the battlefield. He turned to the automotive industry. Specifically, BIC. The engineers at BIC didn't build a military tractor. They built a race car. They gave the M18 a suspension system that had never been seen on a tank before, torsion bars with shock absorbers. It allowed the tracks to move independently, soaking up bumps at high speeds. They installed a massive engine, the Continental RT975. This was a 9-cylinder, 400 horsepower radial engine taken straight out of an airplane. The result was the M18 Hellcat. It weighed only 17 tons, a fraction of the weight of a Tiger. But it could hit speeds of 55 miles per hour on the road. In bursts, crews pushed it to 60 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, a Tiger tank struggled to hit 25 miles per hour. The M18 was the fastest tracked vehicle of World War II. It was sleek. It was low. It looked fast even when it was parked. But to achieve this speed, BIC had to strip away the protection. The armor on the M18 was paper thin. In some places, it was only half an inch thick. It offered protection against small arms fire and shell splinters, but nothing else. Any anti-tank gun, any tank cannon, even a 20mm autocannon, could rip it apart. The designers knew this. They accepted it. Their philosophy was, speed is armor. If you are moving at 50 miles per hour, the enemy can't traverse his turret fast enough to track you. The Germans, observing these vehicles from a distance, saw only the weakness. They saw the thin skin. They didn't see the engine. They didn't realize that they were looking at the first shoot-and-scoot weapon in history. The Hellcat was a glass cannon, fragile, but incredibly dangerous. The most visible feature of the M18 Hellcat was also the source of the greatest German mockery. It didn't have a roof. The turret was completely open to the elements. The crew stood exposed from the waist up when operating the gun or looking out. To the German soldier, huddled inside his hermetically sealed steel box, this was insanity. German infantrymen joked that the M18 was a cabriolet or a sportswagon. They believed it was a fatal flaw. "All we need is a hand grenade," they laughed. Just toss a potato masher into the turret, and the crew is finished. They believed the open top made the Hellcat vulnerable to mortars, artillery airbursts, and snipers in trees. And they were right. It was vulnerable. Hellcat crews lived in constant fear of artillery. When it rained, they got wet. When it snowed, the turret filled with slush. But the Germans missed the tactical advantage of the open top. Visibility. A German tank commander in a Panther viewed the world through narrow periscopes and vision slits. His field of view was tiny. He was fighting while looking through a straw. The Hellcat commander had a 360-degree view of the battlefield. He could hear enemy tanks approaching. He could spot movement in the periphery. In the confused, close-range battles of the hedgerows and forests, the man who sees first, shoots first. The open top gave the Hellcat crew superior situational awareness. While the German commander was frantically cranking his periscope, trying to find the enemy, the Hellcat commander had already spotted him, slewed the turret, and ordered the driver to flank. The Germans laughed at the convertible tank. But they didn't realize that by sealing themselves inside their steel coffins, they had blinded themselves. The Americans had traded protection for perception. And in the ambush-heavy warfare of 1944, perception was worth more than an inch of steel. The first time German troops encountered the M18 in combat, they were confused by the physics of the engagement. It was in Brittany, France, August 1944. A German column was retreating. They were moving fast, or so they thought. Suddenly, American armor appeared ahead of them. The German commanders checked their maps. "Impossible," they said. "The Americans were 10 miles behind us an hour ago." They assumed they had been cut off by paratroopers. But it wasn't paratroopers. It was the 4th Armored Division's Tank Destroyer Battalion. The M18s had simply driven around the German column. They had gone off-road, blasting through fields and ditches at 40 miles per hour, outrunning the German trucks on the road. The shock was total. German anti-tank gunners tried to track the American vehicles. They were used to tracking Shermans moving at 15 miles per hour. They led the target by a certain amount. But when they fired at a Hellcat moving at 40 miles per hour, their shells landed harmlessly behind it. The Hellcat moved like a dragonfly. It darted. It stopped. It accelerated instantly. The German gunners couldn't adjust their aim fast enough. Before they could reload, the Hellcat had stopped, fired its 76mm gun, and was moving again. German reports from the time express a sense of bewilderment. "Enemy tanks are extremely fast," one report read. "They appear on the flanks, fire, and disappear before we can return fire." The speed shock broke the German tactical rhythm. The Wehrmacht was a methodical machine. It relied on set-piece battles. The Hellcat disrupted the set-piece. It turned the battlefield into a chaotic scramble. The Germans realized that their heavy Tigers and Panthers were too slow to react. By the time a Tiger had rotated its hull to face a threat, the Hellcat was already behind it, putting a shell into its engine block. The laughter about the paper tank died in the throats of the German tankers. They realized that they were fighting a ghost. A ghost made of steel and gasoline that moved faster than they could think. The M18 Hellcat was small, but it carried a very big stick. The 76mm M1A1, later M1A2, gun. To the German tankers, accustomed to their massive 88mm and 75mm kilowatt K42 guns, the American 76mm looked unimpressive. They knew the standard American 75mm gun on the Sherman was weak. It couldn't penetrate the front of a Tiger or Panther. They assumed the Hellcat's gun was the same. They were wrong. The 76mm was a high-velocity weapon. It had a longer barrel and a larger propellant charge. But the real secret wasn't the gun, it was the ammunition. The Hellcat crews were issued a special shell, the HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing, round, designated M93. The crews called it the Silver Bullet. Instead of a steel slug, the HVAP round had a core of superhard tungsten carbide wrapped in a light aluminum carrier. When fired, it left the barrel at 3,400 feet per second, faster than almost any German shell. It hit with incredible kinetic energy. The tungsten core didn't shatter, it punched. At 1,000 yards, the HVAP round could penetrate the turret face of a Tiger I. It could punch through the gun mantlet of a Panther. The German crews, sitting behind 100 millimeters of hardened steel, felt safe. They would see the flash of a Hellcat firing. They would wait for the clang of a non-penetrating hit. Instead, they would see a splash of sparks inside the turret as the tungsten dart ripped through the armor, the gun breech, and the crew. The HVAP rounds were scarce, tungsten was a strategic material, but Hellcat crews hoarded them. They saved them for the big cats. Even with standard ammunition, the 76mm gun was deadly against the side armor of any German tank. And because the Hellcat was so fast, it could always get to the side. The Germans had built their tanks to win a frontal slugfest. They put all their armor on the nose. The Hellcat refused to participate in that slugfest. It used its speed to turn the German tank's strength into a liability, and then used its high-velocity gun to exploit the weakness. The big hot rod wasn't just fast, it had teeth that could bite through the thickest hide in the German zoo. September 1944. Lorraine, France. The Battle of Aricourt. This was the moment the M18 Hellcat proved it was the superior machine. Hitler had ordered a massive counterattack to stop Patton's Third Army. He sent the 5th Panzer Army, equipped with brand new Panther tanks. The Germans expected to crush the American armor. They had better tanks, better guns, and the element of surprise. But they encountered fog. Thick, heavy fog blanketed the rolling hills. This negated the long-range advantage of the German guns. The battle would be fought at close range, knife-fighting distance. The German Panthers advanced blindly through the mist. They were heavy, loud, and slow to maneuver. Waiting for them was the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18s. The Hellcats used the fog as a cloak. They listened for the squeak of German tracks. They watched for the exhaust plumes. When the Panthers appeared out of the grey wall, the Hellcats were already moving. They didn't sit still and trade shots. They swarmed. A platoon of Hellcats would spot a company of Panthers. Instead of retreating, the Hellcats accelerated. They split up, racing along the draws and behind ridges to get onto the German flanks. The German commanders were bewildered. They were taking fire from the left, then the right, then the rear. They tried to turn their turrets to face the threats, but the threats were moving too fast. At close range, the Hellcat 76mm guns tore through the thin side armor of the Panthers. Turrets blew off. Ammunition cooked off. In one engagement, a single flight of Hellcats destroyed 15 Panthers and Tigers without losing a single vehicle. The German offensive was shattered. They lost over 200 tanks at Aracourt. The German commanders were in shock. They reported that they had been attacked by a massive force of American tanks. They didn't realize they had been dismantled by a handful of light, open-topped vehicles that cost a fraction of the price of a Panther. Aracourt was the vindication of the speed is armor doctrine. It proved that in the hands of skilled crews, mobility was more lethal than protection. The Germans had brought a fortress to a racetrack, and they had been run over. The M18 Hellcat forced the U.S. Army to rewrite the manual on armored combat. The tactic was simple: shoot and scoot. It was a rhythm of violence. The ambush: the Hellcat waits in a hold-down position, hidden by bushes or a ridge. The shot: the gunner fires. The 76mm gun roars. The muzzle brake kicks up a cloud of dust. The reveal: the dust cloud gives away the position. The German tank turrets begin to swing toward the smoke. The scoot: the driver, engine already revving, drops the clutch. This is where the Hellcat shone. A Sherman or a Tiger took time to get moving. They were heavy. They lurched. The Hellcat leaped. Its power-to-weight ratio was phenomenal. It could reverse at 20 miles per hour. It could accelerate forward like a car. By the time the German shell arrived at the smoke cloud, the Hellcat was gone. It was already 200 yards away, moving to a secondary firing position. The German gunners were frustrated. They felt like they were shooting at ghosts. They would see a flash, fire at it, and hit nothing but dirt. Meanwhile, the Hellcat would pop up on their flank 30 seconds later and put another round into them. This tactic required intense coordination between the commander and the driver. The commander had to be the eyes. The driver had to be the legs. They developed a bond that was almost telepathic. Gunner: target tank, 2 o'clock. Driver: prepare to back left. Fire. Go. 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 the Hellcat crews knew they were living on the edge. One mistake, stalling the engine, throwing a track, getting stuck in mud, meant death. Their armor couldn't save them. Only their reflexes could. But this adrenaline-fueled style of fighting suited the American temperament. It was aggressive. It was fast. The Germans, drilled in methodical, static firing drills, couldn't cope with the chaotic tempo. They were trying to play chess while the Americans were playing speed hockey. Shoot and scoot wasn't just a tactic, it was survival. And the Hellcat was the only machine agile enough to make it work. In a close-range tank battle, the winner is often the one who can turn their gun the fastest. This was the turret race. And the Hellcat was the undisputed champion. The German Tiger I had a heavy turret. Its traverse mechanism was powered by the engine. If the engine was running at low RPM, which it often was in a stalk, the turret turned painfully slowly. It could take 60 seconds to do a full 360-degree rotation. Even at high RPM, it was slow. The Panther was better, but still sluggish compared to the Americans. The M18 Hellcat had a hydraulic traverse system, but because the turret was open and relatively light, no heavy roof armor, it could spin incredibly fast. A Hellcat turret could rotate 360 degrees in about 15 seconds. But the real advantage was the vehicle itself. Because the Hellcat had neutral steering, it could spin in place by running one track forward and one backward, and a powerful engine, the driver could help aim the gun. If a threat appeared to the rear, the driver would stomp on the pedals and spin the entire hull while the gunner spun the turret. The combined rotation speed was blinding. Imagine a Hellcat and a Tiger meeting unexpectedly at an intersection in a French village. Both commanders shout "Gun left!" The Tiger's turret begins to groan and turn, inch by inch. The Hellcat's turret whips around. The driver pivots the tank. The Hellcat gunner has the sight picture in 2 seconds. Boom! The Tiger is hit before its gun is even halfway to the target. This reaction time saved countless American lives. It allowed the Hellcats to win snapshot engagements. The Germans mocked the light turret armor of the Hellcat. It is made of tin, they said. But that tin turret could point a gun at their head faster than their steel turret could point back. In the deadly mathematics of the turret race, weight was a penalty, and the Hellcat traveled light. December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge. The roads of the Ardennes were covered in a sheet of ice. For the German heavy tanks, this was a nightmare. A 70-ton King Tiger on ice is a sled without brakes. If it starts to slide, nothing can stop it. It crashes into trees, ditches, or other tanks. The German drivers had to crawl at a walking pace, terrified of losing traction. The M18 Hellcat drivers, however, discovered something incredible. Their vehicle weighed only 17 tons. It had wide tracks and a torsion bar suspension that kept the treads planted. They treated the icy roads like a rally course. Hellcat drivers learned to drift. They would approach a corner at 30 miles per hour, lock one track, and slide the tail around, power sliding through the turn like a race car. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But it was effective. While the German columns were stalled, slipping and sliding, the Hellcats were skating circles around them. They used their speed to redeploy rapidly along the icy roads, plugging gaps in the American line. At Bastogne, M18s from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion raced from one side of the perimeter to the other, acting as a mobile fire brigade. They would drift into position, fire a few rounds into the flank of a German attack, and then drift away before the Germans could return fire. The German commanders were stunned by the mobility of the Americans in the worst weather of the century. They had expected the snow to slow everyone down. They didn't realize that the Hellcat was built to run, regardless of the surface. The winter drifters proved that agility wasn't just about speed, it was about control. And in the ice of the bulge, the Hellcat was the only thing that could keep its feet. But the speed came at a terrible human cost. The open top that gave the commander such great visibility also killed him. In the freezing rain of the Ardennes, the inside of a Hellcat turret was a bathtub of slush. The crews had no heater. They had no roof. They huddled under tarps, shivering uncontrollably. Frostbite was common. But the real danger was from above. German infantry learned that they didn't need an anti-tank gun to stop a Hellcat. They just needed a mortar or a sniper. A mortar shell exploding in the trees above an M18 would rain shrapnel down into the open crew compartment. The thin steel walls offered no protection. Hellcat crews suffered horrific casualties from artillery airbursts. Snipers specifically targeted the commanders, whose heads were exposed above the rim of the turret. The crews improvised. They welded armored covers over the turret. They sandbagged the floors. But they couldn't close the top completely, or they would lose their visibility, their only advantage. It was a brutal trade-off. To be fast, they had to be naked. The crews accepted it with a grim fatalism. They knew they were riding in an eggshell. They knew that if they were hit, they would likely die. But they also knew that their speed was the only thing keeping the German Tigers off the backs of the infantry. They froze, they bled, and they died in their open cockpits, sacrificing their own safety for the speed that won the battle. The ultimate test for the M18 came face-to-face with the ultimate German tank, the Tiger II, or King Tiger. It weighed nearly 70 tons. Its frontal armor was virtually impenetrable to any Allied gun. When a Hellcat crew encountered a King Tiger from the front, they had only one option: run. But they didn't run away. They ran around. The tactics developed by the 704th and other battalions were like a pack of wolves hunting a bison. One Hellcat would fire a smoke shell or a high-explosive round at the Tiger's faceplate. It wouldn't penetrate, but the flash and smoke would blind the German gunner. While the Tiger was distracted, two other Hellcats would sprint. They would race through the woods or down side streets, pushing their engines to the red line. They aimed for the rear. The King Tiger had massive frontal armor, but its rear engine deck was thin. The Hellcats would get behind the monster. They would close to 100 yards. They would fire HVAP rounds directly into the engine or the rear of the turret. The King Tiger, too slow to turn, too heavy to pivot, was helpless. It was a dangerous game. If the Tiger's turret traversed before the Hellcats got into position, they were dead. But the speed of the M18 allowed them to win the foot race. They killed the giants by biting their heels. German King Tiger crews, who felt invincible against Shermans, learned to fear the buzzing sound of the Hellcat engine. They knew that if they heard it behind them, it was already too late. The Hellcat proved that there is no such thing as an invulnerable tank. There is only a tank that hasn't been flanked yet. When the war ended, the US Army did the math. They tallied the kills and losses for every type of tank and tank destroyer. The results were shocking to those who believed in heavy armor. The M18 Hellcat, the paper tank, the convertible, had achieved the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armored vehicle in the war. The official numbers vary by source, but the 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion alone claimed 240 kills for the loss of 32 vehicles. Overall, M18 units claimed 2,394 kills against German armored vehicles and guns. They lost only 217 Hellcats in combat. That is a ratio of better than 10 to 1. The Germans had mocked the Hellcat. They called it a suicide machine. But the statistics proved that the safest place to be was in a machine that didn't get hit. The heavy German tanks, the Tigers and Panthers, had impressive armor, but they were slow, broke down constantly, and were easily outmaneuvered. The Hellcat was fragile, but it was reliable, fast, and lethal. It was the vindication of American doctrine. The Germans built monuments to ego. The Americans built tools for winning. The M18 Hellcat was the ultimate tool. It wasn't a fair fight. It wasn't a duel of knights. It was a drive-by shooting. And the big hot rod drove away from the burning wreckage of the Panzerwaffe, leaving the heavy tanks rusting in its dust.